You're listening to or watching Talk Amongst Yourself, the solo space where we pause, reflect, and get radically honest. I'm Kaylene, and today I want to talk about something I've been carrying for most of my life. I used to feel guilty for sitting still. A quiet room made me anxious. Rest felt like a luxury I hadn't earned because I grew up on survival, not self care. Learning how to rest, soften, and receive is still a struggle I deal with today, but I think I'm getting better at it. Survival mode was the norm if you grew up in the late 70s or 80s. We were taught strength over softness, hustle over healing, independence over interdependence. Now, when I say strength, I'm talking about, you know, we didn't have helmets when we rode bikes. None of that. That just didn't exist. We built ramps. We jumped those ramps with our Diamondbacks or our cheap Huffies, that we had. And if you wrecked, crashed, whatever you want to call it, spilled out, you just got up. And you know what you did? You did it again. It didn't matter if your kneecaps were bleeding and scraped up. Didn't matter. You weren't going to run home and you weren't going to go get a band aid. You were just going to let the blood run down your legs and you were going to continue doing what you were doing as long as you didn't have any broken bones. And, we kind of didn't have room for softness, you know? Um, and that's what I mean when I mean strength versus softness. You got back up, you rubbed some dirt in it, and you moved on. You know, hustle over healing. The hustle I think came from watching my mom. You know, my mom was didn't matter. I mean, she always worked. We always had a head, a roof over our heads. Um, independence for me, independence was, coming home and my mom was not there. She was working or at your local neighborhood bar, but it didn't matter. She always had a job. We always had a place to live. We never went without food on our table. Um, so survival mode for me growing up was fending for myself. Let me explain that in a bit of greater detail here. I have four older sisters, and my oldest one being 10 years older than I. The next one is 8 years older, 6 years older, and 4 years older. And my mom was always at work. Sometimes she worked nights, sometimes she worked days. I guess it just depended on what job she had and what she was doing. And I've known her to work at night. I've known her to work in the daytime. So it was both. It was a guess, as to her hours. I didn't know them growing up. I just know that sometimes she was there at night, sometimes she wasn't, sometimes she was at work, and sometimes she worked two jobs instead of just one job. And, I can't even imagine what it must have been like for her to have to raise five girls because in our house, it was every night fights, whether it was a fight over the phone or it was a fight over the boyfriend that happened to like my other sister or something. It was always something crazy in my house, whether it was me getting popped in the nose and getting a bloody nose, something was always happening. People were always fighting in our house. Or we were having fun. I mean, I'm not going to say that it was always bad because we had massive, awesome water fights. I mean, one time, I am not going to lie, the hose did go make its way from the back door to the front door, all the way through the house on, and we just had a blast. So, it wasn't always negative, it was positive. And, you know, I also had to deal with a lot of stuff, so I feel like I was always in survival mode, at school, I was in survival mode every day in school. Being of mixed race was very hard for me, and it still is. It is still hard for me. And I'm sure I'm not the only person of mixed race that it's hard for. Um, I was I didn't fit in. I didn't fit in. I didn't fit in with the Mexicans because I was too dark. I didn't fit in with the black people because I was too light. So it was really hard. Every day I was in a fight. Somebody was calling me some derogatory name. I was on a daily. So I was in a fight. It was awful, but that's how I was brought up. Every day it was either a shouting match or it was a physical altercation for me at school, especially in the sixth grade. I specifically remember all this. If it wasn't in school, it was at the bus stop. I mean, that's how it was. Fifth and sixth grade, that's how it was. Um, I wasn't taught to take the first swing, but I certainly was taught to finish it. So if you swing at me, I'm definitely going to finish it. And that's how I was brought up. So I was always in survival mode. I was always looking over my shoulder, wondering who was going to come after me next. And man, I fought probably more boys than I did girls, but it was just all the time. It was nonstop for me. And I think with that type of survival mode all the time, that it has shaped my instincts. It has shaped kind of how I viewed the world and how I grew up. I was always anticipating the worst. you know um, I measured my worth by productivity, and that part for me especially shows in my work. Measuring my worth by productivity was a work thing for me. I felt safest when I was in control because I did what I wanted, I went where I wanted, and I still have that in me. I still do what I want when I want, and I go where I want. And that's just part of me. And that came from the way I grew up. Um, like I said, we always had a roof over our head. We always had food on the table. Yeah, it might have been like government cheese, um, powdered milk, down to powdered eggs. Yes, powdered eggs existed. And farina. If you know what farina is and you had government cheese and you had government food, you know what I'm talking about. Farina is basically the cheapest form of cream of wheat out there you can get. I don't even know if they make it anymore, but it was government standard food. So, when my mom cooked or anybody cooked, you ate what was put on the table. That's what you ate. You just ate what was given to you. You didn't have to. mm, we were never forced to finish our plates, but if you didn't eat, then you didn't eat. That's your problem. So, thank God my mother was a great cook, so I didn't have to worry about that. I didn't have to worry about that part. But I think that these patterns for me of self-preservation showed up. It followed me all my life. It still has. I mean, I'm 53 years old and I still have, you know, this stuff inside of me. I'm getting better at owning it and trying to change it. Um, I had gone through, I think where it started to change for me was right around the pandemic, right after the pandemic, basically. Um, that is where it changed for me. I went through a lot. I went through a lot where I wasn't feeling well. I had a ton of symptoms that I was going through. It was crazy. I mean, I had numbness and tingling. I had weakness in my left hand. I had fatigue. I had vertigo. I had a change in eyesight, joint stiffness, irritability, which is normal for me, I guess, because sometimes I'm irritable. I mean, just ask my wife. But and I'm going to blame that on menopause, though. Um, my right eye was like constantly twitching. I felt like I had brain fog, like I still have that, but I'm gonna blame that on menopause too. Um, Forgetting what I was doing, headaches, and I have internal tremors. And I think I thought it was stress at first because I was working at 911, which is a very, very stressful job, as you know. And it takes a type A control freak to do that. That's what a type A is, somebody who's a control freak. And I thought that I was just getting, that I had PTSD. I mean, I did have PTSD from the job. However, these physical symptoms never like they didn't ease off, going to a therapist. And so I went to the doctor. They've ran every single test you can even imagine. They finally came up with what it was. But I still have the internal tremors and things like that. But I do think that if you were brought up the way that I was, and that was to not share your emotions, to not show your emotions. And I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about when I say, you know, I didn't cry. To this day, it's very hard for me to cry in front of people. Most of the time I'm crying, it's out of anger, but people don't see me cry. It's very rare. And that just comes from that built-in toughness that you were given. And I know, let me step back. I was getting to the point of whenever you cried or whenever you were going to get in trouble. I mean, I know that there are a lot of people who heard this. My mom was like, go ahead, cry, and I'm gonna give you something to cry about. So I just didn't cry because I knew that if I cried, my ass was getting whooped. That's just how it was. And I'm sure I am definitely not, because I've heard other people say this. I've heard other people say this online. So I don't know where that came from, how it came about, but we all had the same experience, you know, back then. And I think me getting ill, that was like the turning point, going to therapy, which I've gone to therapy forever because I'm a firm believer in it. And I just felt like I was having a breakdown. I felt like, you know, I think I just learned that maybe my survival mode, the way that I lived in survival all the time, was probably not the best way to go. It just didn't work for me anymore. Um, but something you've done all your life is not very easy to get out of. And self care just wasn't in my vocabulary, you know? And I was taught, you know, rest was not a reward. I mean, rest was a reward. I mean, it wasn't, it was a reward, but rest is truly a right. I mean, it's something that you deserve, that you should probably partake in. And some of us probably don't at all. You know, I felt guilty for it. I felt guilty anytime I did anything like that. And, now I am learning how to um, reward myself by knowing that I have the right to rest, that it's okay to rest, that I don't have to be falling apart to deserve support, that softness can be strength. And I'm allowed to rest and I'm allowed to receive. And receiving is also something that has been a struggle for me all my life. When somebody says to me, like my wife, she'll say to me, "Oh, you look very nice," or "You look beautiful," or whatever. And most of the time I just roll my eyes because I never learned how to accept a true compliment. And it reminds me of when I was on the volleyball court and I was playing volleyball, and they called me the hammer. They didn't call me the hammer for nothing. I could hit the hell out of a ball at 5'6" as an outside hitter. And, you know, I would go up, I'd get a kill. I'd turn around and be like, let's go to the next play. Celebration wasn't really a thing that I did until the end of the match because I was so focused and so serious about it. And there was no time to celebrate because celebration was bad. So we had to keep going. Let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. You know, there's nothing to celebrate until it's over. And that's truly how I felt. Like you know, I just did not celebrate. So even when somebody was like, dang, that was a great hit, I don't care. Let's move on. Let's go. Yeah, I know it was good, but whatever. I still couldn't receive that. I couldn't receive the positives that people were trying to throw at me. For me, it was easier probably to receive the negative than it was to receive the positive. And, having going through that and having all these symptoms and things like that, I think it was brought on by being in survival mode constantly. And I think that going through that, I mean, it took them 3 years to actually give me a diagnosis. And I think, in those 3 years, that is what made me pause. That is what made me say, look at myself. I had to look at myself and realize that running on empty like that and running on constant survival mode it will manifest in you physically. Yeah, it took a long time to manifest within me, but I'm doing a lot better than I was then. I'm way better now. I mean, I still have some symptoms, but a lot of those are gone. A lot of those are gone, and coupled with the medication, but also coupled with taking care of myself, though, I think has been detrimental to my life. Learning how to rest, which I still don't do very well because I'm one of those people that um, I honestly feel like you need to be competitive and you need to work and earn everything you have. And I have done so through my entire life. I mean, we were taught that we had to strive to be the best. And so it's hard for me to even call into work when I'm sick. It's crazy. So I'm certainly not calling into work when I'm not sick and I'm not, and I'm just hanging out. I wish I could do that. I'm just not one of those people. I'm one of those people that get paid for 40 hours, but I'm going to work 50 hours. I'm not one of those people that expect to be paid for 40 hours and work 30 hours. And those are prevalent nowadays. They're everywhere. Everybody wants to be paid for nothing. Everybody wants to work for nothing. And it's really hard for me to adjust. And so that is part of the reason why I quit coaching. I mean, I coached for 27 years and I stopped coaching because I just couldn't deal with the parents and how they're parenting their children. I don't believe in a blue ribbon. That's how it is. And you're probably going to hear me say that 200 times, but I just don't believe in that stuff. So anyway, it's just been really hard for me to adjust to, um, trying to break out of being tough all the time. I mean, I just don't cry. It's just not going to happen. And if you do see it, I'm going to deny that you ever saw it. So it's best that you don't tell anybody anyway, because they're not going to believe you. Anyway, um, I just want to say that you are allowed to rest and you are allowed to receive, that it's okay. I know that it's not an easy adjustment when people compliment you and they tell you good things about yourself. It's very hard because I think we were always taught that, we had to be tough. We had to have this tough exterior. I mean, I know I did. And, you know, growing up in such a manner, we didn't talk about the birds and the bees. We didn't talk about menopause. We didn't talk about any of that stuff. I had to learn that on my own. And I know it's we because I'm thinking about my sisters, and I know they had to learn that on their own. It's not like they taught me either. It was like this whole silent thing. One thing that I think that I really hated about growing up, and I see it still in some of my family, is sweeping stuff under the rug. Like there are things that happen that we just never talked about and never talked about it as a family, nothing like that. I think about that and I think about the way that it has shaped me. Um, I had a home invasion when I was a kid. Honestly, now that I think about it, we never talked about that. We never talked about how it made us feel. We never talked about how it instilled fear in me. I mean, I still do things that are based around that home invasion. And and that's another thing, we never talked about anything. And so I think that, being in survival mode, it shaped my instincts, like I said. I mean, I truly do feel the safest when I'm in control. And I think that's why when there are situations in my life, which is a lot of life, right? A lot of life we can't control. We can't control tomorrow. We can't control the past. It's gone. I mean, we can control what we feel, how we deal with things in the moment, but we really can't control the moment, I don't think. But, it's hard not to want to control and not to want to be there. Um, so if you're still learning how to soften, me too. If you're still on learning the hustle, me too. If you grew up on survival, you're not broken, you're brilliant. But brilliant doesn't mean burnout. And I think we tend to push too hard. We tend to, especially when it comes to our jobs, we tend to take on all these things and it's hard for us to say no. But boundaries are something that are also part of this. So, I mean, saying no was really hard too, but I'm learning and I'm learning as I go along. And yeah, I'm 53, but it's okay because I think that life is a learning experience and that's what we're here for is to learn and move on. I think that if you don't learn the lessons that you're supposed to learn, they're just going to keep repeating. They're just going to keep repeating. So I also think that me, you, whoever, anybody on the planet, we deserve care that doesn't come with conditions. We truly do. And I want you to remember you're safe even when you are still. You're not behind, you're just healing. I'm just healing. I'll be back next week with another solo deep dive. Until then, stay soft, stay brave, stay grounded, and keep talking amongst yourself. But one more thing I want you to know. This has been probably the 10th take of this particular show. And I think I figured out what it was. The first 9 takes, I wasn't wearing a hat. I put on a hat, and now I feel better about this show. Anyway, have a good night. Take care.